You're listening to the Headless WP podcast, where we discuss all things Headless WordPress. The Headless WP podcast is a production of the WP Engine Developer Relations team. If you're interested in more content on Headless WordPress, check out developers.wpengine.com for blog posts, tutorials, videos, and more. All right, welcome to the Headless WP podcast. I am Jeff Everhart, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Fran and and we have with us also Colby Fayock. So Colby is a user and promoter of Headless WordPress, and he's been on the show before. So the last time he talked with us, he was working for a company called Applitools, and he now works for Cloudinary as a senior developer experience engineer. The last time he was on the show, we talked a lot about Next.js, his WordPress starter, why he chose to use WordPress as a headless CMS, and the pros and cons of it. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Colby or his origin story, definitely check out that episode. But we'll jump right into it today. And so how's it going today, Fran, Colby?
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me, first of all, but doing pretty well. How are you all doing?
I'm doing excellent today.
You know how I am, Jeff and Colby.
Yes.
I'm stoked. But
always.
But I'm super jam stoked to be here on with Colby because there's a thing that people didn't know in the developer world about Colby Fayock. He has he's actually a superhero. His alter ego is Colbinary.
Dun, 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 dun. Surprise.
At the cave, yeah.
He optimizes images really quick in a single bound, which is a good segue into Cloudinary.
Yeah. Anyway. So I'll throw out this first question. So Colby, since the last time you were on the show, you transitioned to a new company and a new role. And why don't you go ahead and tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So, spoilers, I work at Cloudinary. I'm a senior developer experience engineer. So it's part of the DevRel team. And ultimately, I focus more on the code-based things in the DevRel world. So that might include building integrations, trying to work with the community on integrations others are building, technical content, demos, anything that really relates to code is going to be my wheelhouse, and trying to help people learn how to use the best of Cloudinary. And that's things like image optimization and transformations. And there's a huge process and it's a huge platform, but those are usually what the developers, what developers get into.
So awesome. Yeah, it's interesting with Cloudinary too, Colby, because as you know, with us, Jeff and I here over on the DevRel side of WP Engine dealing with Headless WordPress, and everybody's love it or hate it, why the most widely used CMS on the internet. Could you tell us about it's interesting because there was a decision made, and maybe you could give me also, because I'm a nerd about like plugin history, code history and stuff. How did the ideation of like, hey, we need a Cloudinary WordPress, plugin, and what does it do? How does it work? Could you give us the 5,000 feet level overview of this thing?
So I'm not going to be able to give you the full history of it because I don't know the full history of it, but I think generally speaking, Cloudinary as a company, we want to be where our customers or where developers are, right? And like you said, WordPress is the biggest CMS in the world, right? So that's going to be a big win for people trying to easily integrate with Cloudinary, because you can really look at it. There's a bunch of different points in the stack, the full stack that you can integrate. And really it depends on what you're comfortable with and what you want to do, but being able to have that integrated right into your CMS like WordPress is just a big easy win, especially if what you're mainly looking for are some of those optimization wins.
So if I as a developer, like say I go download the plugin in my WP admin, and right off the bat, like I'll get a GUI, right? Does it work that way with optimization analytics for my images and whatnot? And essentially, this is like, I think where Cloudinary shines, right? Is because I toyed around with it quite a bit when I was over sales engineering at Netlify, Because a lot of the times what happens is with websites, images are the most vibrantly used thing because people just want their large sized images on their website so that you can see what they're all about, essentially. That's hard when you're trying to offload it to just like a single bucket or CDN. And Cloudinary has, you essentially are offloading it to their CDN, correct? Is that how it works?
Yeah,
Totally.
that's maybe we could dig into that a little bit. Like what sorts of optimizations does Cloudinary enable versus something that I might install via a plugin?
Sure. So, I mean, the two biggest ones are the way that we kind of position it are the formatting and the optimization, or the optimization where we're talking about more compression. So first of all, the format, you're going to be talking about things like JPEG or PNG or some of the modern formats like WebP and AVIF. Now, what Cloudinary does is when you're delivering from a Cloudinary URL, Cloudinary is going to on the fly determine what is the best image format that you can provide for that browser that's requesting it. So that means, traditionally, or not traditionally, but commonly, it's going to be AVIF for most files because that's usually going to have the best compression for the format. But Safari, for instance, doesn't support AVIF yet. So what's going to happen is Cloudinary is going to see that, and it's only going to deliver WebP, which is going to be the best win for that particular browser. So it's able to do that as part of that request chain where you're not doing anything special. Cloudinary does that for you, and it's a big win. Now,
and so sorry, let me jump in and ask a question just because I want to make sure I'm understanding. And I'm trying to, I've played around with Cloudinary a little bit, so I'm just trying to tease all this out for the people who maybe don't. Because that sounds awesome, right? And so cool. You're not saying this is a JavaScript component that I've got to include that does this for me. This is I include a URL in a regular old image tag, and then Cloudinary between the request from that browser and the server makes all of those decisions for me.
Exactly. And of course, we have SDKs that you can completely customize everything. But ultimately, when you have your media images and videos stored on Cloudinary, you ultimately have that URL to that resource, right? And then you add in the URL, the particular, you say that I want the format to be automatically determined. And yes, it will go out and do that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's wild.
It's funny because it's one of the most high impact features we have, in my opinion, but it's also one of the most basic because, the platform does so much more on top of that. So oftentimes, I really want to talk about it because it's so cool, but then I'm just leaving so much out of the picture.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. Okay, so cool. So that gives us an idea of optimizations. I know you also mentioned certain types of transformations and adding overlays, maybe cropping and things like that. So what does Cloudinary offer in that respect?
Yeah, so if you've been in the development community for a while, you might have seen blog posts talking about things like social images, which I think is probably one of my favorite examples of this, where one of the cool things about Cloudinary is you can pretty much build an image on the fly just using the URL SDK or the URL API. So what I mean by that is we can set up our base image. We can add image overlays. We can add text overlays. We can even transform, adding different effects like colorizing things and resizing to whatever you want. But ultimately, we can build that image or that video on the fly using that URL so that what's the brilliant thing about that is if you're in an application, all those parameters can be dynamic. So if you're coming from a custom source, if you're on social media and you're promoting let's give GitHub for an example, because they have dynamic cards. I don't think they're using Cloudinary, but they have dynamic cards where they pull in the author name, they pull in the repository name. Those are built on the fly, and you can pass those parameters right into the URL and get whatever source you need for that URL or for that image.
Wow.
Oh man. Wait.
That's cool. And so I think the end result, obviously that's a really nice developer experience, but then also you don't have to process and store those images anywhere on your application.
Exactly.
Right? Because you can, so if I'm saying, okay, this is Fran's page and I want to overlay his name over top the WP Engine logo, that's still just one image. And I attach that URL parameter. And boom, that's really cool.
Exactly. And once it's processed that first time, it's cached and served from the CDN from there on out. So you're not going to get the same processing time every time because, depending on how big the image is, depending on how many different things you're doing to it, of course, it might take a second to process. But once it does it that first time, even if it's you just preloading it in a new tab, it's always going to be served from the CDN from there forth.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that is awesome. Because everybody knows in web development, image is everything, and you never get a chance to make a first impression. You never get
There we go. There we go.
Second chance,
to
yes.
make
But France, your earlier point, like it is wild because the web is just naturally like a visual medium, right? There's so much from just simply showing cool stuff to adding context to the different words on the actual page. There's just so much that you can provide by adding these images and videos. And I highly encourage people to use them as large as they can because we want to see those minute product details. We don't want to have to try to zoom in on the browser and have a pixelated blurry image. So we want to be able to show them as big as we can, but we want to also make sure we're being responsible with that by serving it in the modern formats and giving the compression as much as we can without sacrificing that visual quality.
That's so cool. Now, Colby, is Cloudinary, just out of curiosity, and this is like just me nerding about company, is Cloudinary based out of Israel, correct? Am I correct?
Yeah, that's like the home, and then we also have an office in San Francisco, and I think we have a couple other satellite, but those are pretty much the main two.
Very cool. That's very cool. Man. Okay, so I think, Colby, that this question is coming, especially for me, because I love MySpace, but I also complain about MySpace with the front ends. And you've done stuff extensively with Next.js. In fact, in my own web dev journey, when I was a young Padawan in a React bootcamp, lost as a soul with all these components all over the place. And when I spun up Next.js and was doing Headless WordPress, I relied on your videos and your starters. So thank you very much, Colby.
Oh, thank you.
Now, here's my question about that with the stuff that you've done with Next and whatnot. What other like front end frameworks have you messed with as extensively as Next.js, and which ones, like, honestly, do you think could gain close or even gain close popularity? Doesn't have to be even popularity with Next.js because like it's the most popular front end framework for a reason.
There's a big gap there. Yeah,
there's a huge gap, Colby, man. Yeah. So yeah, tell me about that. What have you like other frameworks you've messed with, and what do you think? Oh, this might maybe close a gap with Next.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I've definitely not used anything nearly as extensively as I've used Next.js. A while back, I used Gatsby a lot. That's before I transitioned into Next.js. And I loved Gatsby. It just, once I tried Next.js, I really like the way that they build the APIs around the projects. And it just feels natural for things like data fetching, right? So I really enjoy the DX, and that's why I kind of just stuck to it. That said, there seems to be a lot of awesome stuff going on in the Gatsby world. I know I just saw the founder talking about some new is like regenerative
rendering or something like
that. Yeah. So like it's something that I do want to look back and give it a shot because it sounds like there's some interesting stuff going on there, right? But also there's Astro. I know I'm super excited about that one. I only played with it a little bit, like when it was first kind of launched, and I had a lot of fun with it. I haven't really touched it since then. I that's another one I want to kind of get back on and try, because the thing I like about it is I'm a React fanboy, and not fanboy, I'm a React user, and but like the thing that's great about it is I can use React and Astro, right? And there's a lot of benefits that you get as part of that framework, and they're doing some exciting things too. So I want to kind of go back there a little bit.
You use React in Astro? Is that what you said?
Yeah. You can use a bunch of different UI. What are they? UI libraries. Yeah. It's really cool because you can even mix and match. I mean, that might not be recommended, but you can mix and max.
If you wanted to make a React view spell demo, like
exactly.
Not that you should, but you could. Yeah, exactly. I think so. And they have a really interesting positioning too that I like, because I do feel like when you have these really popular tools, they have a tendency to like become more generalized and to try and serve like all these different audiences. And like I think WordPress, for example, is like is a good example of that, right? Here's full site editing, here's headless, here's your traditional, like, and it can spread out a little bit. Where Astro, I think, sort of positions itself. It's like, this isn't for making applications. This is for making content-focused websites. And so by excluding some of the people who might use Next.js or Nuxt, like it can do some interesting things and, be a little bit more opinionated, I think, about how it does them. So I don't know. I'm interested to play around with it too.
Yeah, me too. Because I think, but this is where, like, because I am like Colby, like my default, because I'm a Next.js user fanboy.
Just say it. Go
I'm going to say it. I'm going to
Just
say
say
it.
it.
I told Lee Robinson I was, so I'm just going to say it
There we
again.
go.
Guys, I'm a Next.js fanboy. Okay, I like it.
Now he's going to give you a mug.
I was gonna, yeah,
Yep.
which he did actually. Thanks, Lee. But so by default, I'll just go to Next, right? When I'm going to do a webinar or I'm going to do a coding tutorial, unless the featured front end framework like Jeff recently did was like Remix or whatever it might be. The interesting thing is that, like, and I want you guys as your two approaches on how you block time off. When I'm doing this, by default, my knee-jerk, I'm just going to create npx create next app, just by knee-jerk reaction. I need to allot time in my life to literally look at docs of Astro 11D, Remix and whatnot, and then play with that. But then in the back of my head, I'm like, you know what? I already know Next.js's structure and its file and next link and all that. Man, I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to read a little bit, but I'm going to go back to that. How do you guys just like, how do you like immerse yourself in something like that and then like try to get, do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Totally get what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to go, Colby?
Sure. Yeah. So no, that's a great point. And that's part of the reason why I haven't really made a full jump off of Next.js is because like I feel so productive in it. And why would I become less productive to try to do a specific task I'm trying to do? Right. But I think us particularly are a bit fortunate where because our job is kind of figuring out these kind of things, especially in the context of the product that we're working with as part of our day job, like we should be able to set some time aside as part of that exploration, right? Now that's easier said than done, and I admittedly haven't done that kind of time allotting yet. But I think generally speaking, like it's important to try to make sure that we're being responsible, trying out the different things, and not becoming so, ingrained into one single thing, making a dogmatic approach with the framework that we're on. But again, easier said than done.
How about you?
Yeah, I think my answer is super similar. So clearly being DevRel practitioners, like that is what our job is to look at Astro and to look at all these things. And so I spend a lot of time doing it now, but when I was, like a production engineer before this, that wasn't something that I did with any degree. Like it was, what are we using to do this thing at work? That's what we used. And like, it took an act of Congress to like change that, and you weren't practically going to do it because it would cost too much money, too much time. And so like we used Vue, that's what we used. Like that was it. There was no discussion. And I'd read some docs or something, but aside from that, I didn't feel the need to like relearn all of these different frameworks just to relearn them. I'd say, oh, that's kind of interesting. And, pay attention to like the macro trends of what's kind of happening. And then, like those tend to, I think then once somebody does something well in one framework, it tends to get replicated across them. You've seen that with like the image stuff from Gatsby to Next and, lots of the render methods and stuff like that, as all of that is churned. So,
I mean, Jeff,
and I think
go ahead, Colby, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think it is important that we, like us as DevRel, are able to take some of our time and do those kind of things, because other people who might not have that kind of time in their job or their life, they're not going to be able to spend all that time on all those different frameworks. So the more that we can do that kind of on their behalf and kind of advocate why something is good for particular use cases, the easier we're going to have, the easier of a time they're going to be having and getting set up for success.
That's a good point. Man, we do good at being DevRel, guys. Making the web a better place, y'all. And it's funny because like and this is a good segue into the next question, because there's all these, frameworks and stuff. And I love talking to Jeff and Kellen and Colby and others that have been in the space longer, because of the mere fact that like look, guys, my sister's actually she is literally in the fashion industry. She's a clothing designer, right? And I was having a conversation with her a couple of weeks ago because she's planning to visit Austin, Texas, and she's like, "Hey, how's the tech industry, Fran?" She doesn't know anything about code. All she just knows how to send an email and use the internet, Google. And she's like, "Oh, it's doing well." And she starts talking to me about how the 1970s are coming back, and the 80s, bell bottoms, flares, big collars on, disco.
Yeah,
it's coming back, y'all. You know what I'm saying? I mean, look at when you spin up a remix app. The guys over there, like Kent and Michael, it looks like an 80s kind of remix. You know what I mean? Like a disco ball.
I heard it first here. Kent is wearing bell bottoms.
Bell bottom. But
he wants to come on the podcast and prove us wrong.
Yeah, come on, come on, brother. But the thing is, Colby and Jeff, and I actually want both of your opinions in this because you guys have been in the space for a bit. Is it safe to say, like, it is kind of the fashion industry in web development, especially with like rendering patterns where, hey, eventually everything comes full circle? You know what I'm saying? Where, hey, it's going to be server-side rendering is falling into fashion again. And, you know what I mean? Like, how do you guys feel about that?
No, I think that's an interesting one. And I personally would say it's less of a trend related cycle. And the way that I kind of see it for our particular use case is because we just didn't really have as much of that capability in the JavaScript world to kind of provide that full life cycle, where that's really where Next.js kind of broke some of those walls down, right? Where they're able to provide, their main goal was to provide a universal application. So being able to have a kind of framework where we can write JavaScript for the entire stack in one application, that really changed things and how we can kind of look at it. I think there's still trade-offs between server-side rendering versus static site generating. Won't go into that part of it, but I see it as more of now we can do this with the tools that we want to use, as opposed to, oh, this is cool, let's just try doing this again.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, let me see how I want to take that question. So really talking about server-side, like, yeah, I think I'm kind of with Colby. Like, I'm not sure it's so much of a cyclical thing, as a lot of it has just been a response to like the changing tool set or the platform getting better, if you will. And so like I can think back to a time when like SPAs, for example, like client-side rendering was the rage, and that was supposed to solve a certain set of problems, and there were trade-offs, like you've got a larger bundle size, maybe the initial load is slower, but everything subsequent is after that, like, is faster. And so I think really what we're seeing is just people having come along and said, well, I kind of like reject this false binary, like maybe we can have both and do both of these things, and built something to sort of solve that problem. And I think that's really interesting too, because like, and that I think was also born of a time like right when mobile became really, really big. And obviously you got mobile, whole new sort of medium, a whole new, browser environment to contend with its own intricacies. And is this really Chrome if it's on Safari, and, all that stuff, and it's not. But then I think we see the same thing happening with like the edge compute and stuff like that. Like that's just making the server more powerful, more accessible. And so now these round trips that used to be really expensive aren't so much anymore. And we're just sort of seeing patterns change based on like what the underlying tool set of the web is, which has just gotten better all around. Like I know I was geeking out about the page transition API. Like there's just so many amazing things that 5-10 years ago would have been really difficult to do, or you'd have to take a lot of time and energy that the browser just has native solutions for now, like smooth scrolling, like lazy loading, things like that are all just built in. So,
man.
And you also got to think about like some of these resources, like the browser is becoming more powerful and can do more things inherently that it couldn't do before. And that kind of also relates to serving files statically versus hitting the server. Like one of the aspects of it, not the entire aspect, one of the aspect was performance. If you can serve a static file much faster, but what if you can serve it from the server in the same amount of time? Hypothetical question, right? why wouldn't you just use the server-side rendering if it's going to make your life easier?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. And it's all that's the other thing, going back to like the framework features and optionalities that you have as a developer nowadays, especially with rendering patterns. And when Colby, you made that statement earlier saying, hey, I feel so productive in Next.js, it allows that feel of getting, what a lot of developers call your dev flow, where you have that productivity because like within a function at a page level, I can choose to server-side render, static site generate, or I can hybrid it, y'all. ISR. So it's just these details that these frameworks that come out, these meta frameworks on top of libraries like React, that have populated our industry and get guys like me interested in, because the barrier of entry just gets look, it's still code, y'all. Like you can't be just a pure marketer or content editor and start like doing headless WordPress. That's one of the caveats. But for people that are interested in becoming coders, especially web developers, man, it's a good time to be in the space. So that's definitely awesome. Yeah.
Sure. Well, so let's switch gears just a little bit. We've got kind of a little bit more personal of a question, Colby. So we know, I think you recently had a child, right? And so how is work-life balance with coding and engineering and fatherhood? So you got any tips for engineer parents? And I got 2 young kids too, so I've got some.
It's definitely a tough one. And I've been super fortunate that my wife has supported me through everything. But like for me, I think the biggest thing is making sure I set explicit boundaries on my time with work. And that's something I used to not be very great at. And I'm still improving on it. Just to make sure that I'm focusing as much of my time towards my family, as especially now that we have the little one. But generally speaking, I love the little guy. It's a lot of fun, and I'm so excited to be able to share this development world that I love with him as he grows up.
Man, that's
very cool.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
Every time you like tweet about like something that, there's an event that happened that your son did. I think you did tweet something was it yesterday or this morning that he did something, Colby? What did he do? I can't remember.
He does so many things.
You did something. How old is he?
He's 1 year old.
He's 1 year old.
Yeah.
At one, look, I've never been a parent, and never been married, never been a parent. I don't think you don't want me being a parent, man.
Oh, come on.
I can barely take care of my Next.js application.
I appreciate the parallel.
Yeah. However, I wonder at 1 year old, Colby, are they walking at one? Am I out of my mind?
It depends on the child. Mine is running around like crazy.
Yeah.
But it definitely depends on the kid. The first, I don't know how many years, but the first couple of years, it's really dependent on the kid, and there's no real set timing, because everybody just kind of develops in different ways, and then it kind of starts to average out at some point.
Okay, so at one, he can walk. He's walking.
Mine
around.
is running around causing trouble.
Can they talk?
No, so he's babbling, and it's hilarious because he likes to steal my phone and then kind of put it up. He puts it to the back of his head, not his ear, and he like babbles as if he's talking on it. It's the cutest thing, but not quite words yet. Beyond like dad or dad, mama,
Yeah.
Do you ever, out of curiosity, combining, like you said, it's hard. Work-life balance is definitely hard, even for single dudes like me with no kids. It's still, the boundaries are less for me. Like you said, Colby, but with not having kids, like on Saturday, I'll pull up code and start working on work stuff and stuff like that because I'm single and I'm bored and you know what I'm saying, and have no life.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And it sounds like, part of the reason why I used to do that is because I love what I do. I have fun with it. And that makes it actually hard to preserve that work-life balance because we're enjoying it so much. So no, I'm right there with you. I used to do the same thing, but now like fortunately in this job, I can say that like on the weekends, I don't work. I don't play, unless there's like, I have some last minute thing I need to do for a talk or something that I forgot to do or procrastinated on. But generally speaking, I don't have to work. And then the same goes for the nights. Once I shut my laptop, it's family time for the rest of the night. But again, it's fortunate, looking like 6 or 7 years back, I used to work at a company called ThinkGeek. I don't think that would apply because, some people have to be on call, especially like during peak season and making sure things don't go down. And, but fortunately, I don't have to worry about that right now.
Do you ever?
You've joined the dark matter developers who one day will have to get your kid to soccer practice and just want this thing to work right now.
They don't,
which
care.
I think is important. Like, because I think especially being in DevRel, like, we spend a lot of time on social media, looking at people who are like highly prolific in this space, and just realizing that there's this whole sort of like other large group of people who aren't like that and who are just trying to use this stuff to get their jobs done. And that's why I do think, like, going back to your point, Colby, that our work is important, because like if we can help them save time, help them get to that soccer game, like that's what we're here for.
Yeah. And kind of like expanding on one of the things that kind of got me into the DevRel space is I used to work at a company that we built mapping applications. And one of the areas was for like scientific mapping applications.
Oh, nice.
And
was it
like
ArcGIS?
We didn't, I think some of the team worked on that. I didn't work on ArcGIS, but like the GIS space generally.
Oh, okay.
I don't know too much about the technical aspects of that.
I'm a map nerd.
Are you? Okay.
Lots of mapping stuff. Yeah.
Well, I know me some Leaflet, worked extensively with that. But yeah, like part of the thing that really like got me excited about it is like, building this application can actually make a difference for somebody if a scientist is using this interface, right? So that's what kind of got me into teaching that, because I'm thinking if I can teach somebody how to more easily build a mapping application for somebody else, for some other scientist, maybe they're going to help multiply that effect and do more good for the world, right? Now that kind of expands to all kind of tooling for what I teach, but that's what got me into it, and that's why I love what we do, is because we can help make that impact.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Do you ever, like, just out of curiosity, when you're like at home and say, oh man, it's a weekday and I do have to get this couple of lines of code in right quick, but your son's right there and he's being really cute. Colby, do you ever take him, put him on your lap and code, and he's looking at code with you?
I do, but it's not as easy as you're making it sound, because he loves to just slap the computer. So he'll be typing and just slapping the keys, not knowing what he's doing. So it's adorable, but it doesn't work out.
It doesn't work out.
No.
It's the best thing I ever did with one of my kids was, there's some program somewhere like where it'll pull up like a terminal window, and if you just bash any of the keys, it'll look amazing. Like you're writing C or something. So I was like, all right, I've got a video somewhere of my oldest daughter at like 2 just slapping this keyboard, and it looks like she's like hacking into NASA or something.
That's adorable.
Yeah.
The funny part about this is that, like, obviously software development is a big part of all our lives. I mean, it puts food on the table and it pays, and we enjoy it, and we're passionate about it. By default, osmosis, whatever you want to call it, whatever verb you choose to call it, your kids, y'all, might be writing JavaScript functions by the time they're 3, even before they go to kindergarten, just because they stare at dad all day long. You know what I'm saying? It's just kind of interesting how that might happen. But anyway.
No, that would be a fun conversation to ask my kids to explain what I do. Right. Just be like, he builds the internet or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, not the internet, but
well, that's awesome, Colby. Congratulations on
thank you
everything like that.
Cool. Yeah, let's jump into our next question. So, compared to, I'm trying to remember when was the last time Colby was on the show? Maybe sometime 2021,
June 2021.
Year ago. Okay, so about a year ago. So since that time, do you feel like the barrier to entry for headless WordPress is lower or higher since the last time you were on the podcast?
That's a good question. I feel like WordPress itself, there isn't too much of a difference. but I do see more of a difference in the resources available and the more seeing it catch traction. So more people are interested in it and more people have resources to help people get started. Tutorials or whatever it is, content like what the work you all are doing. So I think from that perspective, it's definitely helping to lower that barrier. But I don't think too much has changed from a very basic perspective. Like you still install the WP GraphQL plugin, which is fantastic, but that's all mostly under the hood, right? If you're just querying, like you don't really have to do much beyond that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so let me maybe take that in a different way. So if there were to be like large changes in WordPress core to support headless stuff, what do you think it's like? What do you think it's missing? What could be added? How could we make this better?
So I wouldn't consider myself a WordPress expert. So just I want to caveat that before I say something that doesn't make sense. But I think the biggest pain point I've seen right now is the relationship between the editor and a lot of the features it has to the headless infrastructure. And I know WP Engine has done some interesting stuff trying to bridge that experience, but out of the box, it doesn't really have great support. And my understanding is because it's basically on a different wavelength than the traditional WordPress infrastructure. But things like preview doesn't work out of the box unless you're using one of your framework. I forget what exactly has that
plugin.
And what else? Like the Gutenberg blocks, I don't believe work out of the box natively with WP GraphQL. I know there's a plugin that does something, but it's not. It kind of has to like kind of hack at it to make it work, right?
And I think that's actually getting a little better. And I'll kind of give just because there is, I think, there was a sort of a missing piece that there wasn't really a way to define, like a server-side registry of blocks and their attributes. And I think like blocks.json gives a little bit cleaner a way of getting at all that structured data. So hopefully, I don't know. We saw those prototypes the other day, Fran. There's some cool stuff happening in that space. But you're right. Yeah, like at present, it's kind of messy to do it. And the previous, I think, solution was a little bit hacky. Like it had to load everything in an iframe and basically parse through all of your HTML to reverse engineer those blocks and then like send that off. So, but yeah, it does sort of seem like they're on slightly different wavelengths. So we're definitely aware of all those.
Yeah. But the nice thing is like I found that a lot of the plugins that I would use kind of work natively with WP GraphQL, particularly like advanced custom fields and Yoast SEO. I think maybe one or two of them you need a plugin to extend, but still, even just with that, like it works just as if it was part of the original WordPress source, right? So there's not much I have to do, and it creates a good experience on that for using GraphQL to query that data.
Yeah. And I think, I'll say, I think the ACF WP GraphQL relationship will only get tighter. So that's really cool and a fantastic plugin. And a lot of people use that. So cool. So let's switch gears one last time. And so how do you feel about this movement towards edge functions and the idea of pushing things to the edge? And how would you see WordPress playing into this, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, generally speaking, the edge is going to be super handy for really trying to deliver dynamic results to people closer to them, right? So that's going to help speed some of those things up. From a WordPress perspective, I'm trying to think of what would really benefit from that. And a lot of times when you have a WordPress site, it's going to be mostly static content that you can still take advantage of statically driven pages. But what about things like comments? What about, the comments is the first thing that comes to my mind. I'm trying to think of something else, but it's really that dynamic content that is going to be creating an interactive experience for the person who's visiting the site. And who knows, maybe you are using WordPress in a way that the entire thing should be interactive and, updating on the fly where you can use it in that kind of mechanism. But generally speaking, those are the kind of elements that I feel like are really going to benefit from it the most, especially if you take into consideration things like if somebody's logged in and looking at a WordPress site, that's something you might see more frequently on a traditional WordPress site. But in terms of the headless, like being able to take advantage of that so that we can get those, again, personalized and dynamic experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's like a lot of the players in the space with the Jamstack hosting providers like your Netlifys and Vercels of the world, and hopefully our very own Atlas might be in that conversation pretty soon, has to have some moving forward, Colby, and this is just my opinion, we'll have to have some really good support around edge functionality for web developers, because I think a lot of, like people go, it's just a new buzzword, whatever now. And I don't think so. I think this is something that is actually like going to be a very handy, necessary thing, depending on, like you said, your use case for dynamicism closer to the user, if you will. But
totally. And I think it does have some of that buzzword factor to it. I totally, because somebody hears Edge and like, oh, I want my site to have Edge, but like it does have a lot of interesting and compelling use cases, right?
Yeah. I think if I'm not mistaken, because before Edge functions came out on Netlify, I think they ran their serverless functions on AWS Lambda under the hood, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Vercel does theirs on Cloudflare workers.
I'm not sure about that.
I'm not sure. Anyway, it'll just be interesting to see what's under the hood as we push everything all to the edge. I'm always a server nerd, so I just wonder, you know what I mean?
And like you said, the use cases are interesting because clearly you have like that edge compute, right? So I'm going to execute some function or some code and, do something with that. But then talking with the folks from Stellate, it seems like there's like, you want to put your GraphQL endpoint at the edge? Like basically like there was also that sort of option, right? I mean, and maybe I misunderstood them. And maybe it's not the edge, but I believe it was. Yeah. Like, so there's a lot of different ways I think you can use this stuff, and it all has the potential to make it super fast, right?
For sure.
That's insane.
But I will also caveat that there is where did we watch that video, Fran? Was it the Fireship one where they talk about like serverless versus edge functions and how some of that stuff might not be faster depending on what you're doing? So we'll link that video in the show notes. So there are definitely some things to think about as you're architecting your application so that you have an edge function, but it still has to go all the way to a database in Tokyo. Like you're not getting around the speed of light. So
totally. And that's a good point for like really anything, right? Like make sure that you're testing your application and the performance you're getting on it, depending on the solution that you're trying to do. Because like edge functions versus traditional serverless functions, it might broadly be faster, but you don't know how it's going to be for your specific use case.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. Gosh, guys, web development's a lot.
It is.
Man, it's
especially for a 1-year-old.
Yeah. That's right, Colby.
Yeah. Y'all see me in my office tomorrow, just smashing those keys.
Smashing the keys and stuff like that.
In the terminal.
Oh my gosh. Colby, you're not going, this is just kind of a side thing. Because I'm at some point I'm going to meet you. We're going to meet in real life at some point because we're going to be at a JavaScript conference somewhere or whatnot. There's no chance you're going to WordCamp.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. What if I sweeten the deal and say WP Engine will pay for you to go? I'm just kidding. WP Engine. I'm just kidding.
Man, even if so, my fall is packed. I had a nice little break of traveling this during July and August, but there's a lot of awesome. I'm excited with Jamstack Conf. I'm going to Cascadia JS, which is going to be really cool.
Wait, is Jamstack Conf in San Francisco?
Yep, San Francisco. I'll be giving a workshop.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Okay. I'll try to.
Yeah, you did have. I saw somewhere on Twitter you did have like a real packed.
James Quick was talking about it.
Yeah, man, that's gonna be fast and furious. And plus, I think for me, I'm just curious. Like, so because we have this hybrid world now, where like conferences are coming back in real IRL, as the cool kids call it, or in real life for that acronym.
Fellow kids.
Hello, kids. There's hybrid where, like, Colby, are your workshops that you're going to do at Jamstack Conf going to be on demand on YouTube somewhere that I could watch them after?
So, I mean,
Or
that's a great question. I don't know. I think last year they were for Jamstack Conf, but I'm really not sure yet. It's probably a detail I could ask them, and I'm sure they'd have that answer by now. But it all depends on the conference and what their plans are. I think generally speaking, I love when they put it online because I love being able to send it out to people to take advantage of. But depends on what they're trying to do.
Okay, very cool. Well, towards the end of our podcast, I always like to ask just a kind of a fun, silly question to get our personalization on every podcast and get to know our guests.
Is this an edge question?
This is not.
No.
See what I did there?
Personalization at the edge.
Boom, mic drop. We can just stop the podcast. So we know that you're a Star Wars fan and everything. My question is that, and for those of y'all that like haven't followed Colby for a while or just started following him, it's obvious because he has a picture of him hugging the is it Rey, and then there's what stuff. There's Rey. Is it BB-8 is one of them. And
it's the whole team from that first of the most recent Star Wars episode saga. episode 7. Yeah, Rey, Finn. I'm looking at it now. BB-8 and I'm blanking on his name. The bad guy.
Kylo
Ren.
Okay, Colby, have you finished the Obi-Wan series?
I have not finished it. I have not finished it. I started it. I think I'm like 3 episodes in, but it's been a while, so I'm probably gonna need to rewatch. It's the kind of thing where I don't know, Jeff, if you experience the same thing, but it's hard to find time to watch my shows anymore. And if I do have time, usually my wife and I are watching something. Like we just finished The Sandman because it's something we both want to watch, but she has no interest in the Star Wars world. So when we were dating, she went and saw a Star Wars movie with me. Never again. But it's hard to find the time for those shows now.
Yeah, it really is, and that is the truth. If you're parenting,
I hope one day,
an hour and a half, 2 hours of time at night that's like your own, and it just doesn't happen. I remember that same thing happened to me. Like Fran had to really goad me into watching it. Like I might have watched the first episode, and he was like, "Nah, you have to, Jeff. You have to." And so I took that back, and it's like, all right.
No, but I enjoyed the first couple episodes I saw, and I've enjoyed all the new stuff they've been putting out. Like Mando. I've been having a lot of fun with it. I know some of the stuff gets some critical from the diehards, but I've been having a lot of fun. It's there's a lot of cool stuff in that new world.
Yeah. Overall, I see nothing but net benefit for expanding the universe. And as a geek, I'm like, go on. Yeah, you can do this until I die, and I'll be happy. Like I will not be critical and just thankful that this exists.
Well, you heard as far as like branching off into extending the Star Wars universe. Maybe you heard it here first on the Headless WordPress podcast, but maybe you haven't. But I got word that there's going to be a branch off series of Yoda.
Oh.
Yoda and his origin story, because nobody knows what this green guy is.
So now people are going to tune into this podcast for Star Wars news.
Yes.
For coding and Star Wars.
But I haven't heard that. That sounds cool.
Yeah. Which goes together, right? Because most developers I meet are actually Star Wars fans.
The first day in the WP Engine Slack, somebody asked me whether the Force was with me or I would live long and prosper. And I just didn't know how to answer that question because a fight was going to ensue. So we have a Wookiee dance emoji, and that's all I did. Wookiee dance.
I don't know if you actually heard of ThinkGeek. I mentioned that earlier, but it was a geeky e-commerce company. And in my job interview, one of the questions, Star Wars or Star Trek? Something they ask everybody.
I feel like
just don't know who's going to fight for which one.
Right.
The terrifying question.
And is it a bad analogy of me to say that Star Wars would be like React Next and Star Trek is Angular?
I wouldn't say Angular.
Okay. jQuery?
Oh wow, you're really throwing shade there, huh?
Sorry.
Ouch.
I
wasn't sure if the intent was to throw shade at first.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get Twitter blasted now by Star Trek nerds.
Maybe go Moo Tools.
Yeah, Moo Tools. Oh man.
Wait, what are Moo Tools?
It's like the jQuery precursor.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Pre-jQuery.
They didn't in boot camp. Now I have to.
I can't imagine they're teaching those at boot camp anymore.
Wait, can is this still available, or is this can I?
Oh, I have no idea.
Oh, okay. That's okay. Cool.
Yeah. Well, when you open up your laptop to code on the weekend, Fran, you can check out Moo Tools.
We got homework for you.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But all right, y'all. Colby, we definitely want to be respectful of your time. Thanks for coming on, hanging out with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been. We'll probably have you back once you finish Obi-Wan, so we can get your reactions
and get the updated news on the Star Wars.
Yeah. But all right, y'all.
All right. Thanks, Colby, for being on. And that was it. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Headless WP podcast. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and give us a share or a like on whatever platform you're listening on. And be sure to keep in touch with the WP Engine Developer Relations team on Twitter, Discord, or through our website. Thanks for listening.